The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty platform of Cedar Creek Station as the westbound train wheezed to a stop. Margaret O'Brien clutched her worn carpetbag with trembling hands, her dark hair pinned beneath a simple bonnet that had seen better days. At 26, she carried herself with quiet dignity despite the whispers and pointed looks from other passengers who had learned of her circumstances during the long journey from Boston. She was a mail-order bride, traveling to marry a man she'd never met. The arrangement had been made through a matrimonial agency, after a series of misfortunes had left her with few options: the death of her parents from influenza, the loss of her teaching position when the school closed, and mounting debts that threatened to land her in debtor's prison. Thomas Hartwell stood waiting on the platform, his weathered hands turning his hat brim nervously as he scanned the departing passengers. At 38, the rancher had the kind of lean strength that came from years of hard work under the Montana sky. Beside him, his 8-year-old son Samuel peered out from behind his father's legs, his dark eyes wide with curiosity and uncertainty. "Pa, which one is she?" Samuel whispered, tugging on his father's worn denim jacket. Thomas had been wondering the same thing. The letters they'd exchanged had been practical affairs, discussing household duties, expectations, and the basic necessities of frontier life. There had been no photograph, no detailed descriptions beyond brown hair, average height, capable of household management and child-rearing. Margaret stepped onto the platform, her blue traveling dress dusty from the journey, and looked around uncertainly. She spotted a man with a young boy who seemed to be searching the crowd, and something in their tentative manner suggested they might be looking for her. "Excuse me," she said, approaching them with careful steps. "Are you Mr. Hartwell?" Thomas removed his hat completely, revealing sandy brown hair touched with premature gray. "Yes, ma'am. Thomas Hartwell. And this is my son Samuel." The boy peeked out more boldly now, studying Margaret with the frank assessment that only children possessed. "Are you going to be my new mama?" he asked with startling directness. Margaret knelt down to Samuel's eye level, her voice gentle and honest. "I'm Margaret O'Brien, and I'm here to see if your father and I might make a good match for marriage. But being a mama is something that has to grow naturally, don't you think?" Samuel considered this seriously, then nodded. "My real mama died when I was little. I don't remember her much." Thomas placed a protective hand on his son's shoulder. "Samuel, why don't you help Miss O'Brien with her bag while I get the wagon ready?" As they rode toward the Hartwell ranch, Margaret learned about their circumstances. Thomas's wife had died in childbirth 3 years ago, leaving him to raise Samuel alone while managing a modest cattle operation. He needed a wife to help with household duties and provide Samuel with feminine guidance, while she needed security and a place to belong. "It's not a love match," Thomas said quietly as Samuel dozed between them on the wagon seat. "I want to be clear about that from the start. I'm looking for a partner, someone who can help build a life here. I can provide for you, treat you with respect, and give you a home. But I can't promise romance or grand gestures." Margaret nodded, appreciating his honesty. "I understand, Mr. Hartwell. I'm looking for stability and purpose, not fairy tale endings. I think we might suit each other well." The Hartwell ranch was modest but well-maintained, with a sturdy log house, a barn, and corrals that spoke of careful attention to detail. Margaret could see the potential in the place, imagining how a woman's touch might improve the practical but austere homestead. Over the following weeks, they settled into a courtship that was more negotiation than romance. They discussed everything from financial arrangements to child-rearing philosophies, approaching marriage with the practical consideration of two adults who understood that survival on the frontier required partnership above passion. The wedding was arranged for a month later, giving them time to become acquainted and for Margaret to prove her capabilities as a homemaker and surrogate mother to Samuel. The ceremony would be simple, performed by the circuit preacher in the presence of a few neighbors who would serve as witnesses. But as the wedding day approached, something unexpected began to develop between them. Thomas found himself looking forward to their evening conversations on the porch after Samuel had gone to bed. Margaret discovered that Thomas had a quiet sense of humor and a gentleness with his son that spoke of deep paternal love. Samuel, for his part, had taken to following Margaret around the house, helping with chores and chattering about everything from the names of their cattle to his dreams of someday having a horse of his own. Miss Margaret, he said one evening as she helped him with his letters. Do you think you might stay even if you and Pa don't get married? Margaret looked up from the slate, touched by the worry in his young voice. Samuel, why would you think we might not get married? I heard Mrs. Henderson telling Mrs. Patterson that mail-order brides sometimes change their minds and go back where they came from, Samuel said solemnly. She said some ladies think ranch life is too hard. Margaret set down the slate and gave Samuel her full attention. Samuel, do you know what I was doing before I came here? He shook his head. I was living in a tiny room in Boston, working in a laundry for barely enough money to eat one meal a day. I had no family, no friends, and no hope for anything better. Margaret's voice grew stronger as she continued. Here, I have meaningful work, beautiful surroundings, and most importantly, I have you and your father. This isn't too hard for me, Samuel. This feels like home. On their wedding day, Margaret wore a simple cream-colored dress that she had sewn herself from fabric Thomas had bought in town. Thomas wore his best suit, the one he'd been married in the first time, though he'd had it altered to fit his leaner frame. As they stood before Reverend Morrison in the modest parlor of their ranch house, surrounded by neighbors who had become genuine friends over the past month, Margaret realized that something remarkable had happened. She had come west seeking security and found affection. Thomas had sought a housekeeper and helpmeet and discovered a true partner. Samuel had gained not just a caretaker, but someone who genuinely delighted in his presence and took pride in his accomplishments. Do you, Thomas, take Margaret to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live? Thomas looked into Margaret's eyes and saw not just the practical woman who had answered his advertisement, but someone who had brought warmth and laughter back into his home. I do. Do you, Margaret, take Thomas to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live? Margaret thought of the long journey that had brought her to this moment, of all the hardships that had seemed like cruel twists of fate, but had actually been leading her home. I do. As Reverend Morrison pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel cheered loudly enough to make the adults laugh, and Margaret realized that love didn't always announce itself with dramatic declarations. Sometimes it grew quietly, like prairie grass after rain, until one day you looked around and realized your heart had found exactly where it belonged. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, Thomas reached over and took Margaret's hand. I know this started as a practical arrangement, he said quietly, but I want you to know that somewhere along the way, it became something more for me. Margaret squeezed his hand gently. For me too, Thomas. I came here looking for security, but I found something far more valuable. I found a family. Samuel, who had been chasing fireflies in the yard, ran up to them with a jar full of the glowing insects. Look, Ma and Pa. I caught enough light to read by. Margaret's heart caught at hearing Samuel call her Ma for the first time, and she saw the same emotion reflected in Thomas's eyes. Sometimes, she reflected, the best things in life aren't the ones we dream about, but the ones we discover when we have the courage to build something real and lasting with another person, one day at a time, until what began as necessity transforms into something that feels very much like love.